New Zealanders treat the sea as their very own playground. But when the weather turns or something goes wrong on a boat, the sea can be a cruel environment.
The 12-metre yacht rolled 360 degrees and was dismasted, cutting off all radio communication.
This was what the Coast Guard called a nightmare scenario. 110 young boaties struck by massive winds and high seas.
Trapped inside his upturned yacht for more than 3 days, even the most optimistic feared the worst.
Just walls of water coming at us from all directions. It's like a washing machine.
Keith Ingram loves the sea. He spent the last 35 years on the water, in the Navy, in the fishing industry, as a Coast Guard instructor and marine consultant.
How do I treat the sea? The same as Mother Nature, with a huge amount of respect. I've been at sea a long time. I have a huge respect for the sea. I actually love the sea, but I know that I'm the foreigner.
Keith is taking a group of sea survivors back on the water for a weekend. They will tell their stories and Keith will share his knowledge on surviving at sea. Gordon Mann and Brian Murray have a wealth of ocean racing experience, but even the best prepared can come face to face with atrocious conditions on the open sea. Jill and Alan Maddox and Paul Geddy survived a sailor's nightmare. Their yacht sank in the middle of the ocean. No one knew where they were. They spent the next 2 weeks trying to survive in a life raft, praying they would sight land. Charmaine Sutherland isn't a great fan of the water. She can't even swim. Charmaine and Rennie Hughes got into trouble off the Napier coast when Rennie's boat broke down. They found themselves drifting further from land with no way of raising the alarm. Michael Vasey was on Auckland's Manuka Harbour fishing close to shore with 2 mates when the weather turned foul. He learned that being ill-prepared in poor conditions is a recipe for disaster. If you were lost at sea, would you survive? On average, 18 New Zealanders die each year in boating accidents. Tragically, most deaths could have been avoided by following a few simple rules, such as checking weather conditions and making sure everyone on board has a life jacket.
Swim! Come on, swim!
Over the weekend, our 8 survivors will tell their stories and Keith will share his knowledge on how to stay alive at sea.
There's a few things that you should know about Rebel before we get underway. We have all the relevant safety equipment on board. Murray, would you like to...
Once the crew are sure everyone knows where the safety equipment and life jackets are stored, they cast off.
That's all copy. Press back here.
Auckland Coast Guard, this is Rebel, ZMR 3865. TR, do you copy?
Copy. Press back here.
Thank you, Rebel clear.
In April 1999, Brian Murray and Gordon Mann left from Melbourne on an ocean race to Osaka, Japan, on the Green Hornet.
The weather forecast when we left Melbourne was there was a great big high, and it was sort of extended right across the Tasman. And we thought, wonderful weather ahead of us, absolutely wonderful weather.
They thought they were completely prepared. The Green Hornet was fitted with tracking beacons, safety lines and a life raft. Plus, the 2 yachties had a wealth of offshore racing experience. What they weren't anticipating was one of the worst storms the Tasman Sea has ever seen.
It was good from a racing point of view because it was coming from behind and we were going away from where the centre of the low was. In fact, we were averaging 200 miles a day, so we didn't have any real concerns. We had all our safety equipment, and of course in bad weather you're tied to the boat with a safety harness.
The pair took turns at the helm, 2 hours on then 2 hours off, but during one of Gordon's shifts he was swept overboard.
I'd surfed down this 40-foot wave and sort of actually washed me out the back of the cockpit. You hang on to the boat, you don't want to leave the boat if you can possibly help it. And going through the back rails, we broke one of the lifelines, but I'd bruised my arm. I wasn't sure at that stage whether it was broken or bruised, but it was bloody sore.
The safety harness saved Gordon's life.
We thought that perhaps the best way, under the circumstances at that point, was to motor. And because these seas were huge, they were on the port quarter of the boat, And we're talking 15-metre breaking seas, very high wind velocity, and a very uncomfortable situation where the boat was being continually washed over by monsters. So it was at that point that it was a good decision to try and motor and keep the boat speed down.
Slowing the Green Hornet as it raced down huge waves would have helped give the boat more stability. Keith gets Gordon and Brian to create a makeshift sea anchor with a chain and 2 blankets to ease the boat's speed.
Now, Sir Peter Blake used this twice in his round-the-world epic voyage with Exeter, and then they streamed it out from the 2 hulls. The more drag you can create, the more control of the stern of your vessel this will have. So even at night time, we could leave it out all night, and then hopefully by the time the blankets start to destroy themselves and everything else, the storm or the conditions we're in would have abated, bring it back in and get on with our sailing. Now what we've created here is a bit of a sausage, a bit of a dog's breakfast, but we stream this out over the stern of the vessel now. We're going to create a belly and it's something there to drag, but it's not going to be too much where it's going to stop the boat physically. Now you're starting to feel the load on it there. You can see how it's bellying. You can see how the water's now starting to flow over the blankets.
Yeah, you certainly know you've got a weight on behind you. I'm surprised how effective it is.
Now, if that was out further, say 50 metres behind the boat, it's not going to bounce up as we come out of a wave or anything like that. It's going to stay there. It'll be down under the water. You won't actually see it, but you'll be creating a lot of drag. And she'll effectively take 2-3 knots off the boat, which is what we're trying to do, and it's going to stop our stern from catching up with our bow.
But with Gordon injured, there was little Brian could do to control the boat in the atrocious conditions.
As I was driving along, the boat would sort of go from 4 knots through to 14 knots with the wind through these monstrous waves. And then all of a sudden I heard a roar from hell. And I looked up and I have never seen anything like it or so frightening in all my life. It was a solid wall of water. I guesstimate it was well past the top of the mast, which is well over 55 foot. I put it round about 60 to 70 feet, straight up and down with a curling top and coming through these monsters at 40 knots plus. Well, it hit me and totally washed me off the boat. And then it picked the boat up and I ended up actually parapunting down the face of this wave above the boat. The boat came down, and the next thing I came down, I must have landed, I think, on top of the boom because I took out 3 ribs.
The impact of the wave and the boat just crashing just woke me up instantly, of course, and what had happened, I'd been thrown against, I figured out afterwards, must have been the roof of the boat. I realised that the boat was mortally wounded, and at the same time I realised I'd broken my arm and dislocated my wrist, and I thought, I've only got 1 arm, that's going to make it difficult. And I said to Brian, Mayday, EPIRB. And the reason I said that was that I realised that I was not able to go do much to contribute to getting the life raft organised.
Brian's experience paid off. He managed to launch the life raft and get the injured Gordon on board. But in his haste, Brian grabbed the race tracking beacon instead of the emergency beacon, the EPIRB.
Nobody ever prepares you for the contingency where you've got to launch a life raft where you're both injured. I mean, nobody ever says, this is the drill for this, you know, oh, you've only got 1 hand and you've got a couple of busted ribs or 3 well, this is how you should do it.
We suddenly realised that we're still attached to the boat. The boat was going down. What happens next? Do we get pulled down with it? I had my safety harness on. I'd actually attached it to the life raft. I was frantically thinking, shall I disconnect myself? Shall I stay with the life raft? I mean, we were quite bluntly panicking then and thinking, what's going to happen next? It can't get much worse.
Brian Murray and Gordon Mann's yacht had been rolled by a massive wave. With their life raft still tied to the sinking yacht, there was the danger the men would be dragged down with the boat.
The boat started to sink. The mast was actually tapping on the top of the life raft. And our immediate thoughts, of course, was where the hell is the knife to cut the tether, because the boat is going to sink and we're going to go down with it. And we started to really panic. All of a sudden, down she went.
Fortunately, the weak link parted on the tether, and next minute it's quiet. We're drifting away, and the last thing I saw of the Hornet was just the pulp at the bow disappearing below the seas.
With their yacht gone, they were now at the mercy of the sea in a life raft. Brian had 3 broken ribs. Gordon had a fractured arm and a huge gash in his head.
You can imagine we're in 40-foot waves, the crests are breaking, and every now and then one would hit you square on. It was just like being on the surf on the west coast. The life raft just got flipped upside down. Brian shot out the entrance. I stayed inside. I remember saying to Brian, the only way we're going to get this is for you to swim the life raft around and let the wind blow it back over. And Brian did that with a hell of a struggle.
It was a bit hard with the 3 busted ribs, I can assure you.
Yeah. I threw myself around on the inside to try and right it, and eventually it came up, and I dragged Brian back in through the cockpit, and he was coughing up water as I brought him through the entranceway, and he said, I can't do much more of this.
I got very, very cold. My teeth started to chatter, and then my body started to chatter. And the only respite that we ever had was when you actually peed your pants. You know, you had 2 minutes of warmth, and it sounds crude, it sounds terrible, but in a lot of ways, you look forward to urinating.
Although Brian had grabbed the race tracker beacon rather than the yacht's rescue beacon, rescuers picked up their position 6 hours after the Green Hornet sank. The question was, could the pair survive the sea until help came?
The mind games I played with myself was to think positive. As far as I was concerned, I was going back to get there. The other thing I'd done is left my wedding ring on my bedside table, because they're dangerous when you're sailing. They get in the way and they get crushed. And I thought, I'm going back to get that ring. And I don't care if I have to swim back, but I'm going to get back.
All night, the seas pounded the life raft and the sailors. Gordon badly injured and Brian now suffering from hypothermia.
Gordon said to me, he said, I can hear voices. And I told him he was a nutter. And he said, I can hear voices. And anyhow, he pushed me to one side, and coming down sideways to us in these huge waves was this about 120-foot naval patrol vessel called Warrnambool.
Next minute, I'm hanging onto the rail at deck level, and they said, step over, and I said, don't worry, mate. And then I looked back down, and there's Brian down below, and I just said, for God's sake, we've got to get Brian out. Don't leave Brian. And I think up to then, willpower or whatever, it just kept me going. But once I felt on the boat and I was safe, I just let go. Just a flood of tears came up.
But the next thing, this thing came down the side and I got into it. And I ran up the side of the ship. I tell you what, my fingernails are still in that steel hull, still in there. I thought, you know, we've come through this. I've lost our beautiful yacht, but we've survived and we're both alive. We're injured, but we'll live to fight another day.
We'd die for each other, I reckon.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bond there that'll never be extinguished now.
Yeah.
Much as I can't stand them smoking on the boat, we still go sailing together.
Kiwi yachtsmen Brian Murray and Gordon Mann were finally back on dry land.
Brian and Gordon overcame enormous odds to survive the sinking of the Green Hornet and then to endure the pain of injuries and hypothermia in that storm for 24 hours. Coast Guard search and rescue trainer Brooke Archibald has been involved in hundreds of sea rescues. What does he believe are the key lessons here?
I think the number one thing that comes through here is strength, their willpower, their thoughtfulness. They were certainly prepared, but you can't plan for everything, and this really shows that you can't plan for everything. Handling injuries, you can't plan for injuries. They certainly did a lot of things well, and at the end of the day, I believe that they had a plan, they had teamwork, they worked together, they thought things through, and they had a will to live.
Like many boaties, Rennie Hughes wasn't entirely prepared if anything should go wrong at sea. Rennie and Charmaine Sutherland went boating off Napier late one afternoon in October 2002. Rennie's brother-in-law Sam also came along to help pull up crayfish pots.
Rennie's the water rat, I'm the land crab. Yeah, I've had absolutely no sea experience. I've never been on a boat before, so it was first time. Yeah, I thought everything would be fine. No, I can't swim. Can't swim at all.
Looks like nothing.
No, nothing yet.
Everything went well, and on the way back, we just went to change fuel tanks, wasn't it? And the thing motor just cut out. I knew it wasn't fuel, because we had plenty of fuel. I knew it couldn't have been a motor, because it was a new motor, so we went through, a check like I normally do, and it was electrical, because there's no power getting up the console.
With no power, the boat began to drift further away from land. Rennie and Sam began to paddle, but against the offshore wind and tide, they were getting nowhere. However, Rennie had done one very good thing before the trip.
I said to my sister, as I say when I go out, that if we're not back by a certain time, call the Coast Guard, just as a safety thing, But that was my backup. I wasn't expecting anything to go wrong, but that was my backup.
Even with search and rescue knowing they were missing, the boaties had no way of communicating their position. No cell phone, no working radio, and no flares.
It was getting really, really cold, and my bottom jaw was starting to sort of quiver, and I was starting to shake, and I could feel the chill really sort of setting in. And Rennie threw another coat over me, but I was still cold, and Sam was there and I was here, and I could feel him also shaking. It was just so horribly cold. I said to Rennie, I'm getting really frightened. And Rennie said, it's going to be all right, Shah. He says, you won't go in the water. He said, the boat's seaworthy. He says, and you're safe.
They could see land, but had no way to reach it. They were getting colder, the sea growing bigger, and now night was falling. Rennie, Charmaine and Sam were helpless. Their boat was floating miles from land and they were unable to contact rescuers. Rennie's boat was ill-equipped for any difficult situations.
When we're at sea, we recommend that people have a boat bag. And it can be any old bag, just something that you dedicate to your boat. So we'll just go through what you might like or think we should have in the bag.
Well, gaining from my experience, I'd have to be the flares.
Flares?
Yeah.
Okay, so stick our flare pack in there.
Night and day flares.
Night and day flares there are there. There's day, smoke, and there's 2 rockets as well. Okay?
Definitely a radio.
You put a radio in.
Yep, a marine radio, proper marine radio.
Okay, can we have a marine radio? Okay, we've got the handheld VHF. I understand you've gone out and brought a similar version one.
Yes, I bought Rennie one for Christmas.
Okay, well that's excellent. Okay, well, what else do you think we'd have in?
Torch.
A torch? A torch in?
I'd have to go for a bit of water, because we found that we got quite parched there for a while.
Having water, extra, a lot of comfort. So we have water.
Bit of
Bit of food?
Yep.
We've got some muesli bars, bit of energy chocolate. Gets a bit cold at night. So we have a bit of woolen clothing, a nice good woolen jersey or swan dry, anything that's wool. Because wool, when it's wet, will still keep you warm, won't it?
That's right.
Okay. First aid kit, just a little one, doesn't have to have a lot in it, but a good starter. You can throw a whole lot of things in it, but you want to keep it into one tight grip bag, which you can have ready at any time when you want to go out on the boat.
Without a grab bag, Rennie, Charmaine and Sam faced a grim night at sea. They were at risk of getting hypothermia and being swamped in the small craft. Rennie's grapple anchor eventually appeared to be holding on the seabed, and while he could not move the boat or call for help, he did something crucial. He stayed calm. He even fished.
I sort of looked onto it as an overnight fishing trip, keep a calm about the place. Yeah, I didn't want anybody to get hysterical or nothing like that. So my main concern was if I looked relaxed, well, that might have reassured them that everything was going to be all right. So
I was going through my mind, how could you be so calm, Rennie? Why are you so calm,
Later that night, Rennie spotted what he thought was a coastal buoy off Napier. So he and Sam set about paddling towards it, hoping to tie up and stop their continual drift out to sea.
As we were getting closer to the light was getting closer to us. We weren't getting closer to the light, and then that's when Sam, the guy that was with us, he said, it's a boat, you know, and the thing was coming straight at us,
Yeah.
you know, and it was getting closer, and because we couldn't do anything.
With no flares, Rennie tried desperately to light a pair of shorts dipped in petrol to attract the passing boat.
I said, well, don't have it too close to the boat. I said, hold it out as far as you can. I said, we don't want to be catching on fire either. And poor old Rennie's standing there trying to flick this lighter and nothing was working.
We were yelling out and trying to draw attention to ourselves. But when the boat steamed past us, which is only probably 10, 15 metres away, I suppose, it was pretty close, you know. It was pretty close. And because we could see right in the cockpit, and there was no one in there. There was no one home at all. That thing was on autopilot, and she was going home. Yeah. And
they would have hit us, and they wouldn't have known.
No.
I broke down and cried. I don't think Rennie knew that I was having a cry. And I thought, well, I'd never see my mum again, and I'd never see my children. And with the wind noises, and I told the sea to be calm. I was trying to think of in the biblical days where Jesus was out in the boat in the sea, and it said, now be calm, you know. And I stood up and I said, now be calm, sea. And nothing happened. And I thought, well, I'm pretty sure he's listening to me, but nothing's happening.
Even in seas that often came over the side of the boat, Rennie kept his cool. But it was a long, cold, rough night in a small vessel.
It just was most unpleasant. I wouldn't like anybody else, you know, to go through the same thing.
Early next morning, Rennie's message with his sister paid off. The trusty volunteer Coast Guard found the boat, and Rennie had learnt a hard lesson.
I'm a typical average Kiwi bloke, and he wants to just go out and do his thing, you know, without doing it properly, you know. And because I suppose that's what the nation of people we are, you know. Go out for a fishing trip, we don't want to get too carried away with spending hundreds of dollars on unnecessary stuff, which we think we don't need, but at the end of the day, you get caught out anyway, and there'll be a lot of guys out there like myself, you know, thinking it's not going to happen to them, and it does.
This was an unplanned overnight stay. Two things happened. Number one was they got very cold, and it's amazing how cold it can get at night out in the open sea. The second thing was they couldn't communicate. Vessels going by that they couldn't attract their attention, and that must have been very painful at the time. I think the lucky thing was that the weather, it maintained a level of sea conditions that the Sea Nymph could just handle. Had it got worse, it may well have been a different story.
Michael Vasey, his nephew Marcus and his best mate Dave were heading out for a short fishing trip in April 2002. Like hundreds of fishermen going just offshore, they took the minimum of gear, including safety gear.
The weekend before, I'd come back and I had some good-sized snappers, you know, big stuff, and my mate got real excited about it, so we liked fishing together. So that Sunday, we were supposed to go out on the Saturday, but the weather was too bad, so we went out on the Sunday. Went out to catch some more good-sized fish. The boat itself was just a little 12-foot runabout, enough to fit 3 guys. Had a little 7.5 horsepower on the back, just enough, you know, to get 3 guys floating around and have a good fish, a bit of a good time. It was a bit overcast, but the weather itself was fine. There was no rain, very little wind, and it was pretty smooth. Well, we're out there for about half an hour. We're out fishing with our back to the heads, and we just felt a wind come up behind us, a really strong wind. So the 3 of us had turned around and looked behind at the heads and just watched a metre swell come in behind us. The weather just turned within a matter of 10 minutes.
Michael and his mates had checked the weather, but only on Sky TV, which didn't give a full picture of conditions on Auckland's Manuka Harbour.
Sky TV and those sort of forecasts are really designed for on land, you know, if you want to go and play rugby or do something like that. And on the marine forecast, which we have, is really totally different. It's updated every 4 hours, so you know what's actually going to happen. And it's one of our best aids. And when we look at the weather forecast for that day, there was actually a strong wind warning out, and it was fairly brisk from the southwest.
Yeah, well, the wind to me actually felt like we were sitting with our back to the heads, and then the wind just hit us from behind, so which made us turn around because the wind to me got a lot stronger and a lot rougher.
The only thing that changed your circumstances that day, the tide turned. You had wind and tide together, and when you've got wind and tide together, it tends to flatten the water. And so in the small 12-foot boat, you were quite comfortable. The moment that tide turned, you get wind against tide, and it can stand it immediately on end, and you can be in a metre sea within 20 minutes to half an hour. And that's why when you check up on the weather, it's important also to note what the tide is doing.
But the fishermen also made another fundamental mistake: no life jackets. Swell grew and their small dinghy was soon swamped.
When we first hit the water, we actually laughed at each other. He made a joke out, I think it was, now I'm going to have to get wet, aren't I, and swim. And then, yeah, it was pretty good. It wasn't too much drama at all in the waters at first.
What they did next would be crucial to their chances of survival. What should you do if your small boat tips up? Keith is running through an exercise with Michael and 2 other survivors.
Now, we've ended up in the water. Just grab anything that floats. Okay, we're in the tide. Boat's still floating because it's got the built-in positive buoyancy. It's turned upside down. Critical thing, first and foremost, what do?
Stay with the boat.
Stay with the boat. So we stay with the boat, we hang on to the boat, we hang on to anything else that's floated out that will give us additional buoyancy. Our bag of goodies is still floating.
You got a bit of assistance back here?
Well, we've got our fuel tank that's floating. I've tied it on very quickly, not the best of knots, and we throw that to Rene, then we can pull him back into the boat. Not all boats float positive buoyant like this one. Not all boats are like that, so we'll assume that our dinghy has sunk, is gone, and so we let it go quietly away, and our bag floated away, and it's just us in the water. Just come together now, that's it. Link our arms, get round together. By doing so, you're actually looking at each other. You can see if anyone's going to start suffering with hypothermia. You've got to keep them awake. Don't allow them to drift off into noddy or anything else. While you're all together, you're giving each other confidence and you're building confidence. And you've got more chance of being seen as a big group of us together than one person in the water. And because we've got life jackets on, we swim on our back. Just all lay on our back. Then we see land pretty close. So let's have a bit of a pick.
When Michael and his 2 mates ended up in the water, they waved to a windsurfer. The windsurfer spotted them and went for help.
We weren't sure if he had of because he went past us like we were waving, calling for help, and he went straight to shore. It looked like the boat was going to sink straight down. So Marcus says, well, let's just swim for shore. There's no use trying to stay with the boat, start swimming.
As a general rule, individuals in the water don't float easily, especially if they're wearing clothing. And swimming is not easy, and it's not easy in 1 metre seas. Very hard to say what the windsurfer should have done, whether he did the right thing by going to shore and notifying the authorities. Perhaps, in hindsight, it may have been better for him to just stay around there and let the individuals who were struggling hang on to the board, but it's very hard to judge.
When you go down the first time, you get a real panic attack, but being I was landscaping and everything else, I was pretty strong and I'm a confident swimmer. When I come back, I put the panic out of my mind. But halfway back, I lost sound of them. I couldn't hear them. So I turned around to see what they were doing. I couldn't see them. It was just waves, up over my head. I started to try and swim back towards them, but because the tide had turned, the current also had us, and there was just no way. So all I could do was I just turned around, spotted a rock, and just started swimming for it, swimming against the current.
After swimming for 3/4 of an hour, Michael made it to shore.
When I got there, all I could think of was turn around and look back out to sea to see where my mates were. And that's when I really started to panic, when I couldn't see them behind me. And there's no sign of them. I realised that, well, they're gone. That wasn't good. That was the worst feeling in my life. The worst thing was actually having to identify Dave's body when they brought him out. And I couldn't actually identify it. I went up about 100 yards away and recognised his shirt and said yes. I couldn't face him from there.
A lone survivor identifying his mate after a tragic end to their Easter Monday fishing trip.
We have found a survivor, we have found one deceased, and we still have one man missing.
Many a time, many a night I've lied awake thinking I should have done something different, you know, to help save them. And I would have never thought I'd been out in the ocean like this and then fighting for my life and lose 2 of my best friends due to it, for the sake of wearing a life jacket, you know.
The one message, I guess, that Michael portrays to us and that we all want to reinforce is life jackets. Life jackets, life jackets. Every boat that goes out should have enough life jackets on board for every person on board, and in small boats, wear them.
Keith wants our survivors to run through a man overboard exercise. Gordon Mann has volunteered to take the plunge while taking a pee off the back. This is apparently when most men fall from boats.
Man overboard! Okay, someone get the life ring, raise the alarm.
Man overboard!
Okay, right, about to turn to starboard. That's it, now keep your eye on him. Move up the front, move up the front. See how small his head is now? So the first person who spots the person go over the side, they do not take their eyes off him.
Keep your arm pointing so you don't lose the man overboard even when they may disappear behind waves. And if you're the one in the water, raise one arm so you are easier to spot.
Okay, I see him now. Stand by with the life buoy because he's getting a bit tired now. Okay, now try not to hit him, but throw him the life buoy. Now got buoyancy. The immediate panic now is gone. That's it. Now we can pull him in. Put the line, recovery line 4. Now help him aboard. Well done.
Gordon's learnt his lesson about relieving himself off the back of the boat. It was a quiet night in the middle of the Pacific Ocean when the yacht Pono ran into trouble in 1977. Skipper Paul Geddes, his sister Jill and her husband Alan were en route from Fiji to Vanuatu when Pono struck something.
The water came in very quickly. We had a look into the head to see what had happened, and there was splintered wood in there, so obviously the whole side of the boat had sort of been torn apart. We felt we were very experienced, but we just had a problem comprehending that the boat would go down so quick. So obviously you were very, very shocked at that stage.
Well, I certainly panicked a bit.
Mayday.
We realised we just couldn't stop the water coming in, so we got the 20-litre pails which housed extra flares and extra food.
Mayday.
The concerning thing, I think, was endeavouring to get a mayday out and realising that the old double sideband radio that I had took 3 minutes to warm up before it actually transmit, and the boat sunk from under us within a minute and a half.
The Pono crew were left in the middle of the ocean in their life raft. They had no rescue beacon because they weren't mandatory at the time. No one knew where they were. The morning after the Pono sank, Jill, Alan and Paul were forced to call on their survival instincts.
We made a decision that we'd have no water for 24 hours because that's a predetermined thing when you get in that sort of situation. And the body didn't really mind that because for the last 5.5 months we had been eating and drinking rather well, so you'd have to say that we had a bit of excess condition that certainly helped in the first few days.
Not drinking for 24 hours sends the body a message not to expect much water. The 10 litres they had was then rationed. In the next few days, the sea anchor or drogue on the life raft held them in a position near to where Pono had foundered, but no one knew they had sunk.
The biggest decision we made is that after 5 days we had a meeting and decided to pull that drogue in. Once we pulled that in, the raft just took off. In other words, you were then moving with the currents. You were just sort of doing about 2 or 3 knots. It was quite amazing that you were moving so far, but you're still at the mercy of the tides and the wind.
The Pono crew hoped they would drift towards the islands of Vanuatu. Days and days passed with no sight of land and water rations steadily diminishing.
The raft itself had rations, which is like biscuits and glucose pills. And also we had taken a grab bag, but it was in a container of extra food. But after about 4 days, with the lack of water, you couldn't physically eat anything. In other words, the body was starting to dry up.
We picked up a washboard when the boat went down, and I took the scissors out of the first aid kit and scratched into the board what actually occurred over the time. I wanted to leave it as a record in case we didn't survive the situation and somebody would know exactly what occurred. Day 1 is no food or water. Today, blowing 15 to 20 knots, raft needs pumping.
So, what should you do if you need to use your life raft?
Now we're on the trigger. This is only a short one by the looks of it. Give the cord a pull.
Keith has a training raft for an exercise with Alan and Jill from Pono and Gordon and Brian from Green Hornet.
Now remember, you're in a little boat, so don't everyone get on the same side as one. Now, you're the first person in. Your role is to assist the others in. Okay? We want to make sure we get everybody in the raft. Secure your environment first and try and get rid of water out of the raft. And check for injuries. Anyone who's got injured, you park them so they're safe. Activate GPIRB. Jill, Alan, did you feel comfortable in the raft?
I was okay, but I think that yourself and Paul was
we
feeling
felt a bit queasy.
Certainly the different movement compared with the yacht is a factor, yes.
Inside the pack, we'll find some seasick pills. We get them out and we use the minimum amount of water to take the seasick pills, get them down and settle down. That is really important because we don't want you to suddenly start being sick and getting rid of all that body fluid, and it's from now on it's critical. If we get rain, the raft is fitted with a water gathering device and we can refill up our bottles again. And if you have a look up there, Gordon, when it starts to rain, just let it rinse the canopy off a wee bit to get rid of the salt off the canopy, and then as soon as you can, fill every available receptacle you've got on board, and once you've done that and you've still got water coming in, then you can have a good drink.
On day 9, their decision to lift the sea anchor paid off. They spotted land.
Well, it was a wonderful experience to see land when you've been in a life raft and you wonder whether you're going to survive or not. But no, it was a great thrill. But of course, we knew we still had to get there.
There was a couple of oars on the life raft, and we attempted to paddle, and it was quite surprising. In our condition, it was the glucose tablets that I'd bought at the chemist, and it was like somebody giving a drug, because you would go for 15 minutes paddling and then you'd crash, and it wasn't until you took another glucose tablets that would give you the strength to carry on.
But on day 10, the horizon was empty again, and now their water rations were getting perilously low.
It didn't rain during the time, or not enough to collect. So we ended up having a tablespoon of water in the morning and a tablespoon at night.
I kept looking at Paul, and his eyes and cheeks were sinking into his face, and later he told me it was doing the same, but you would never tell him that because you didn't want him to think that he might have been deteriorating. So you just hung on there for everybody else.
On day 15, the life raft drifted close to Pentecost Island, the very last island in the Vanuatu chain.
We just slowly got closer to land and drifted across probably the only part of the island that didn't have cliffs. So we went across a small reef and then up on the beach.
We were pretty fortunate because we supposedly landed on the last beach on the island. If we had gone past that island with the currents, it would have taken us through. The next stop was Indonesia. And at the time that we landed, we could actually push the life raft down in the water. In the top ring, you could see that it was perished, and the bubbles were coming up through.
Jill couldn't really walk. We was very, very tired.
The earth under your feet felt absolutely wonderful, but there were 3 New Hebrideans on the beach, so they stood back for a while because they didn't realise who or what we were. So we later found out that they thought we were their ancestors returning. So it took us a little coaxing for them to come closer to us.
Jill's leg muscles were so weak she couldn't walk. The islanders led them to a stream for their first proper drink in over 2 weeks.
They took us to a stream, so we lay there, we drank that. We actually had bottles off the boat that we took with us, and they must have thought they were our prized possessions because they sort of kept them with us and they'd fill them up and give them back to us. So over the next few days, yes, we took on a lot of fluid, and obviously they fed us as well.
Against the odds, the crew of Pono had survived their boat sinking and 15 days at sea in a life raft.
I think that it was relief. It was relief that basically that stage of it was over. We'd survived. We'd survived a situation that we were extremely lucky to. Let's get out and enjoy life now.
After a weekend on the water, all our survivors have picked up information that may one day save their lives at sea.
I think you've got to enjoy the sea, but also respect it and make sure you're prepared for anything that can happen.
Life jackets, always take a life jacket, even if you're out on a little dinghy. If you're out just fishing out, just out from the beach, carry a life jacket.
It doesn't take much to go through a course. The books are free, everything's out there. Do it, because it's just not worth it, eh? Just not worth it.
Never, ever, ever take the sea for granted, but if you do get into trouble, never, ever, ever give up.
The sea is a fantastic friend, but it's a friend that doesn't have too much of a soul, and it can really come and bite you. So we love the sea. We tell people to enjoy the sea, really enjoy it. It's just fantastic. But please, please respect it, because it can bite.
See you later. Okay. You get onto that course, mate.
I intend to.
Okay. Cheers. Take care.
Whatever you do, you've got to always have in your mind and plan for the occasion. What happens if my vessel sinks? At that point, you then need to make a decision. You're down to your last option. Make sure it's a good one, because it could save your life.
Over on Sky One next, it's The Simpsons. Grandpa's bagged himself a lady friend and Bart's doing what he does best. You got it, causing a whole heap of trouble. Speaking of which, over on Sky 2, more adults try to dig themselves out of a hole as they're asked, are you smarter than a 10-year-old? Here on Sky 3 next, though, meet the men and women who shout dinner is served to the ocean's most violent creatures, shark feeders.